Jonas Salk, polio and the polio vaccine. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, the death toll of polio grew immensely, affecting roughly 27,000 Americans and killing more than 7,000 people. In desperate need of a cure, doctors started a mass research program in hopes to cure polio. Eventually, breaking the barrier of nature through science, Jonas Salk found the vaccine for polio, saving over 10 million lives worldwide. Polio is no longer putting people's lives at constant risk, but the anti-vaccination community may be doing just that. The anti-vax community is creating barriers for their children to get vaccinated. Their actions are foreshadowing the possibility of many diseases coming back. Polio arrived in Vermont during the late 1800s. There is still uncertainty on how polio made its way to Vermont, but the presence of it needed to be eradicated in short notice. It caused a local pandemic in Vermont. In the middle of July, children under the age of 16 years old would be getting the disease. Locals would call it the spotted fever. They would soon realize that this spotted fever would make people, specifically kids, paralyzed. By the end of that year, they would finally call it by the name of polio and take the statistics of the infected and killed. Through the following years, the disease would spread to other states in the US, such as Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. It would cause systematic lockdowns in other states. In 1934, Dr. Brody and Dr. Calmer each had produced a failed attempt at making the polio vaccine. Dr. Calmer was the fourth president of the American Association of Immunologists, and he spent his entire career in the city of Philadelphia. He taught at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine and the Temple University School of Medicine. In 1935, at Temple University, he developed his attenuated version of the polio vaccine, which he had tested on about 10,000 children. Around the same time, though, Dr. Brody at New York University tested his polio vaccine version on 20 chimpanzees, himself as well as children. When the testing finally came to be, 11,000 individuals enrolled. Sadly, both of these endeavors ended in a catastrophe, with many of those involved dying of polio, becoming paralyzed, ill, or exhibiting severe allergic reactions to the vaccines. Breaking the barrier of nature through modern medicine, Jonas Salk created the first effective vaccine 20 years after the catastrophe. Dr. Salk was appointed as head of poliovirus research at the University of Pittsburgh. In 1947, Dr. Salk began producing an early version of the vaccine, and by 1953, they managed to finish it. It was all made from putting Mahoney, MEF1, and Suquet, the three poliovirus strains, into a monkey's kidney cells, growing it and inactivating it with formalin, an antiseptic. It took 6 years for it to be developed. Because the tissue culture method that was needed for it to be produced was not finalized until 1949. It was created by John Enders, Frederick Robbins, and Thomas Walker at Harvard University. Dr. Salk also had to make sure it would be safe for public testing. The following year, in 1954, Dr. Salk began all polio vaccine testing with 1.8 million children, ages ranging from 6 to 9 years of age. This trial occurred across the United States, Canada, and Finland with a total of 211 test areas. During this trial, they used the now standard double-blind method, which involves both the researcher and the participant not knowing what is being administered. The trials began at the Franklin Sherman Elementary School in McLean, Virginia. In 1955, they finished testing and broadcasted the success on radio and television.
Dr. Jonas Salk, discoverer of the first successful vaccine against infantile paralysis, gives the first official reports to a waiting world at the University of Michigan. Dr. Salk's own child was one of the 2 million children involved in tests of his vaccine. Tests which have ended for all time the threat of one of the world's most vicious diseases. Doctors Francis and O'Connor have been close collaborators in the vaccine's development. Dr. Francis personally carried out the extensive experiments with the help of Canadian laboratories, and it will be developed further.
Now, the thing to remember is that this is a continuous process, and all that we can say is that the experience as acquired a year ago was as reported today. The experience with a test of a vaccine that could be made today is likely to be considerably better.
So the news is spread. Children and adults soon can be vaccinated against polio. No news has ever been more gratefully received.
Within that year, they started distributing vaccines and companies started to mass produce the IPV. In 1960, a man by the name of Albert Sabin had completed and licensed the oral poliomyelitis vaccine, or OPV. Thanks to the distribution of polio vaccines, hospitals started inoculating people and caused a decline of 80 to 90% polio cases. 60 years later, in 2017, there was a progressive rise in a community that does not believe in vaccinations. This community is called the anti-vaccination community. They believe that the government wants to give children autism and that the vaccinations provide horrible aid and sickens children rather than help them. This all happened because of a spread of misinformation by an article that has been disproven multiple times. As the College of Philadelphia states in their History of Vaccines article, most scientific and medical experts are satisfied that no connection exists between vaccines and autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. Although there is evidence presented to the anti-vaxxers, they still stand by their decision, stating that Big Pharma is paying the hands behind these articles. They continue to not vaccinate their children. It's understandable that there are clear risks to vaccines, but if one were to weigh the people harmed or lost without using a vaccine, rather than those using the vaccine, one would be able to see that vaccines help more than harm. As the quite important video by Portzgazak states, let's say 10 million children caught measles. What happens? 98% will get a high fever and a very unpleasant rash. 8% will suffer from dangerous diarrhea. 7% will suffer from an ear infection, which can lead to permanent hearing loss. 6% will suffer from pneumonia, the most dangerous side effect of measles, which will single-handedly kill 12,000 children. 0.1% will get encephalitis. 0.025% will contract SSPE. About 20,000 will be killed by measles. Now, let's repeat this scenario, but this time around the 10 million children are vaccinated with MMR. After being vaccinated, only 10% will get a fever, 5% will get a mild rash, 0.001% might get a serious allergic reaction and will have to get treated. 0.0001% of boys will get genitalia inflammation. Up to 10 kids in total might get the most serious side effect, encephalitis. In total, around 120 will contract somewhat serious side effects. The anti-vaxxers not vaccinating their kids gives some diseases like polio a chance to bounce back and harm the immunocompromised babies and the children that didn't get a chance to vaccinate beforehand. So as stated, polio quickly turned into a pandemic, causing many deaths and infections. Soon enough, people would begin to try to find a cure or a prevention method for it. By 1954, the IPV would be produced, helping the cause of stopping polio, along with the OPV, which came 6 years later. Now, with our modern day era, people would begin to distrust vaccines for reasons such as Big Pharma, vaccine injuries, and autism vaccine links, which some have been proven untrue. With such controversy, this can cause some diseases to bounce back.